The inauguration or keynote speech will be by Juan Moreno Piñero, who's the director of the Academy of Yuste and the director of the European Documentation of Extremadura. He's a person that we have shared many adventures with in these past years since he started chairing this foundation. He's a very well-known person who is very determined to make this seminar as relevant academically as it deserves, because his goal is to create these European networks for us to make more Europe. So, Juan Carlos, I don't want to elaborate too much on this because I know you will touch upon all these subjects. So the floor is yours. Thanks for chairing the seminar and thanks for being in charge of this keynote speech. Good morning. Good morning, dear Rosa, dear colleagues, dear students. One of the most relevant dates for the Yuste Foundation is this European Doctoral Seminar connected to the Charles V European Award. For Yuste, this seminar is one of our yearly images of the future of Europe. Having all these relevant people from the intelligentsia and these young people coexisting and being here at the same time, people who have shown, the students have shown their research capacity and have been selected by a juror among very relevant works. This event hadn't taken place in the past year, On June 21st, 2019, we closed in the Yuste Monastery the Yuste Award that was given to Marcelino Oreja. Some of the teachers that are present here in this room were there at that time in June 2019. We were so far from imagining what was about to happen just a few months after, when we reflected about potential future problems in Europe, and nobody, not in our worst nightmares, could imagine what was about to happen. Since June 21st, 2019 to now, today, November 24th, 2021, many things have happened in Europe, but none as important as the thousands of people who have died, who got sick, and who were affected in their works and businesses by the pandemic. Therefore, I think my first words today are addressed to honoring those who were the victims of COVID-19. In this dramatic time, Europe has been put once again to the test, and what arose was a Europe based on solidarity that is so connected to the Europe that appeared after Second World War. But let's start from the beginning. 5 years after the end of Second World War, Europe was still covered in the blood that had drenched its fields. Their physical, moral, and material injuries caused by the conflict hadn't been healed yet. The question at that time was whether to let them heal or cauterize them. Any treatment before leaving them open, leaving those wounds open. At that time, in 1950, Europe followed the path of its eagerness to rebuild itself. And there were different options. Some were the supremacy of the winner or compassion for those who had lost, Versailles or Nuremberg, joining forces or the prevalence of the strongest. Giving ourselves to um, foreign powers or following its own uncertain path, memory or forgiveness and forgetfulness. Europe was, in the words of Schumann, in a crossroads. That was a time when two comets crossed that can either greet each other or can clash, creating a stellar chaos. Europe finds itself once again in a complicated situation. It is true that the current challenges are very different from those 70 years ago, but the hopes and the desires of people are just the same. In 1950 and in 2021, as it happened before and it will happen in the future, humans always look for the same thing: a peaceful life free from conflicts. And if conflicts are to appear, what people want is to be able to trust an independent and efficient justice. People want a life that is healthy and having the tranquility of having a public um, assistance or public health system. The practice of solidarity as the cement for coexistence, as well as having enough resources to have a decent livelihood. The pursuit of economic growth that is not at the expense of people, enjoying a clean, sustainable, and balanced environment as a perfect stage for our harmonic coexistence. These days, we are going to talk a lot about Europe and its future. We're going to talk about more Europe as this solution and the response to skepticism and those who live in the amnesia of the past that took Europe to disaster. Europe was conceived as a space of peace, and today, after the pandemic, we need to rethink Europe as a space of peace and life. Europe built itself for decades based on the desire to be united in the face of diversity, but today we have to be united also against challenges. And the only way of being united is through solidarity. Solidarity in the face of disasters. Patricia Gonzalez will talk about this. And solidarity outside catastrophes or disasters. Solidarity is the principle that you are so familiar with through your research and the reason why you are here today. But do not think that Europe needs to be united only against the health crisis. There are more tragedies outside of the pandemic and the catastrophes that we cannot ignore and that call for solidarity. Our solidarity with other members, as Mary Washinger will probably tell us about. The number of people who died as consequence of the pandemic is really dramatic, and the number of those who were affected physically or economically. But that number is no more dramatic than the 8,500 children that die every day of starvation. And we turn a blind eye to that. Or the 5.2 million children who died in 2019 due to diseases or causes that were avoidable. Children that will keep starving or falling sick in unnecessarily. Innocent children who will not be remembered when we consider ourselves safe from all evil after the trauma of the COVID. There are three figures that were the characteristic of the European Union until a couple of years ago. In our territory, 7% of the world population live, and we have 25% of the industrial production of the planet. And here, in Europe, in our territory, there is 50% of the social expenditure in the whole world. These were figures that made us feel proud. in a moderate way, because there was the other side of the coin. 113 million Europeans who are at the risk of poverty or social exclusion. Almost a fourth of the European population is in this situation. Up until not that long ago, our concern was the foreseeable instability of those numbers in the mid and long term, because Europe is aging, and that calls for more public resources that were difficult to generate. The current reality, opens a new scenario that forces us to have social expenditure that is at least at the same level. And this will force us to rationalize the redistribution of expenditure. Each generation has had its problems, some larger than others, but at this point, we are going to be facing challenges of one or another type. This was announced by Stefan Zweig in The World of Yesterday. Stefan Zweig said, one same generation would be the witness of at least, or at the most, one generation. Another generation would see a coup d'etat, and maybe another generation would be the witness of a fourth and the fifth generation of starvation, and another generation of a national bankruptcy situation. And many privileged countries maybe would not suffer any of these situations. This generation was in that situation. None of those things were lived by this generation. As Jérôme Bachet, the historian, said, historians consider that the 20th century started in 1914. Without any doubt, in the future they will explain that the 21st century started in 2020 with the COVID-19 crisis. Before the health crisis caused by COVID-19, we thought that we were safe from any problem that would be out of our control. But we realized that's not the case, that we are much more vulnerable than our trust in ourselves let us know. And we realized that globalization, that brought us so many goods, is also the source of many major nuances that we will have to live with in a situation of vulnerability. We were used to watching the world, sitting comfortably in our sofas, and watching a screen. And just as we see advertisement, we could see the drama of the refugee camps, those queues to get a hot meal or a blanket, migrant boats full of despair, or supermarkets lacking all basic goods. We thought that that could only happen to others. Now we are aware that this can happen to us too, and that maybe the pandemic is just a general essay, or the prelude of other problems that may affect us if we keep clinging to our daily life small problems and we don't face the major challenges that humanity is facing. A gigantic human drama, that's what migrants and refugees are. I'm really happy that a few of the works selected address this problem. Eva Krikova and Nuria Ferre will tell us theoretically and in practice about this very complex problem that they are that they're experts in. The phenomenon is complex, but people are not. The problem is the addition of different factors that are sometimes incompatible between each other. We are talking about the human trauma suffered by those who have no other option but to try to venture and try to arrive to a place that they conceive it safe, like Europe, at the risk of their life, risking their lives, and sometimes risking the lives of those that you love more than yourself. This hopelessness sometimes comes from the horrors of war, starvation, or any type of violence that affects especially women and children. If at any point there would be last judgment to humanity, they will be the most ruthless prosecutors. The vaccine against COVID-19 was a great medical remedy that was created in the fastest times, that in the best cases cures the disease or makes us immune against it, but it won't be able to solve other evils caused by the virus. For example, the social gap, because the pandemic in the beginning, although the pandemic did not distinguish its targets in the beginning, it did distinguish those who are going to be affected, because what I'm talking about is the financial aspects and the terrible economic situations caused by the paralysis of the social life, and the loss of money, especially those who were in a more modest situation are suffering the most. I'm really looking forward hearing what Pablo Alonso Rodriguez can tell us about this, about how in the next years those who were rich will become richer and those who are poor will increase. In the world of education, the gap will also increase, and in a very short time we will go back and lose some of the progress made in the last decades to achieve an education without discrimination and an equal education. The vaccination is a great remedy, but we should not think that we can cover the sun with our thumb. Let us not repeat that mistake. I have mentioned some of the most pressing problems in Europe, and we must always embrace those references that allowed us to be united, although there have been those who have abandoned the ship. We will hear what Elena Samarsky can tell us about that. I will give you some references about the roadmap for the future. Reference number 1, Europe is a peaceful political community. Europe is based on the desires of peace and prosperity after the war. This first stage was followed by politics of integration and cooperation, for which it was necessary to identify the common interests and solve the opposed interests in an orderly and joint way. It is good to look at this in the same direction and solve frictions, but without peace, those perspectives become blind. 2. Europe is an unfinished project. Following what Schuman said, Europe won't be done at once and in a joint way. Europe doesn't have any guarantees of peace and long-lasting peace and liberty and democracy for all its members that is long-lasting. Building Europe without thinking that there are still things to do is something that we all have to keep in mind. And it's our duty that should be transmitted from generation to generation. We are at the risk of letting ourselves be carried out by the apparent success of the Union, and we are at the risk of losing conscious of the fragility of these values. Not enough time has gone by as to ensure that the objective has been fulfilled. 3. Europe is under constant threat, under constant attack. Our democracy, our model of coexistence are permanently under threat and that are attacked by 4 enemies that, as the writers of the apocalypse, try to annihilate it. Extremism, terrorism, racism, and any type of hatred. Europe must be strong and resist against these attacks with full determination. 4. Europe shall only be strong as long as it is united, and shall only be united if values are shared. If Europe shares common values, it'll be united internally and will appear strongly. The lack of strength will is made evident in the face of problems like migration, and that goes against the interests of the people who are seeking shelter, and it goes against the interest of Europe. Same thing happens with other aspects like the climate or external affairs or security. I also think it's of the utmost important for member states, to keep united and to respect each other. When we think about Vivaldi, Cervantes, and Renoir, and when we think about them not as an Italian musician, a Spanish writer, and a French painter, but as European geniuses, something will have started to change in our minds. 5. Europe must be open to dialogue. Internal cohesion and external strength shall only be achieved if we accept that nobody has total truth, and that economic, social, or political power do not imply being right. Dialogue must not only be internal, but also with other regions of the world, and especially with Latin America that we are so connected with. This dialogue must be carried out between equals, without any centers or peripheries, and a shared economic dialogue must be started based on the complementarity of the economies of both regions, based on the abundance of natural resources that exist in Latin America and that are lacking in Europe, the flow of migrations from Latin America to Europe, the investments from Europe to Latin America, and the social, educational, academical, and scientific cooperation that will set the foundations for a renewed cooperation.
It is important that we are together, but that is not enough. It is important that we are together, but it is more important that we make things together. And of course, I think the research and the papers by Isabel Cristina Ropera and Vanessa Milena Monterroza will be of the utmost importance for this. 6. Europe has to be green. It is necessary for Europe to rethink its economic and ecological politics through the Green Deal of the European Commission or any other useful instrument that could arise. Through this Green Deal, the carbon neutral politics need to be achieved for Europe that will enable it to keep on being innovative and competitive. 7. Europe has to invest and save. Our finance has to be structured in such a way that the development of each country and the common development are both allowed and possible. But we need some financial margin to undertake decisive actions in solidarity. So it is of vital importance that we invest in the advancement of the science and research, in looking for a remedy for all diseases. We have to guarantee solid public finances and provisions that are saved and generated in times of economic welfare that will enable us to have enough margin of maneuver so that we can face future crises that for sure will come. And when the future crises come, we have to act in solidarity. Otherwise, there will be a clear loser, humankind. 8. Europe has to be sustained by common values. European Union defends cooperation, respect, and tolerance that leads to peace, freedom, and prosperity. Those are the European values, or at least some of the most characteristic ones, that shape the image Europe has towards the rest of the world and our signs of identity, our traits of identity. Today, when multilateralism is subject to pressures that weaken the international balance, where old conflicts and quarrels that we thought were lost are threatening to explode again. The defense of the values that shape our identity is more important than ever, even if the percentage of the European population and our economic power are receding. But the road that we have before other powers, especially booming China, will show whether Europe really speaks with one voice, with a weak voice, or if it's muted. And I want to hear what Marco Marcelli has to say about it. 9. Europe has to be alert to the centrifugal forces. In Europe, there are centrifugal forces, and there have been a while in Europe, and they are seizing the opportunity of the cracks, of the weakness, of the weakening of our common values, the lack of solidarity in the defense of the common values, and the cracking of the expectations of the European Union and its institutions, because the social development of each member state do not progress at the same time, and when the economic and social gaps are too big. 10. Europe has a future, in spite of the centrifugal forces and the latent threats and the problems that are pending upon us, such as swords. There is a future, thanks to the honest dialogue and the defense of our common values. The same values that unites us and differentiates us from other powers in the world, led by other interests. The respect to the human dignity, human rights, minorities, freedom, democracy, equality, and the rule of law are our identity, and we need to preserve them. Europe has a future. The future of Europe are its youth. You. The youth of now and the youth of the former times have repeatedly heard that the future is complicated and gloomy and competitive, and if you are to face that challenge, you need to be ready and you have to train adequately. That is a reality. Those who were born at the end of the 20th century incarnate the biggest hope of Europe, because you've been trained, you've been educated in peaceful, plural, and democratic societies where the other, far from being an enemy, has been a complement and a reason for growth. Your parents or yourselves have never had to take part in any war, which is a novelty in Europe. You have been the beneficiaries of some exchange programs, such as the Erasmus program, that has enabled you to see by yourselves that in Varietate Concordia is much more than the motto of the European Union. But if you are to start or pursue your training or enter the labor market, you find a new scenario that was not included in your life script. The labor precariousness or the ruthless unemployment. Being a mileurista, meaning earning around 1,000 euros a month, was something that many youngsters did not want. Now, being a mileurista is an aspiration for many. 11. The value of solidarity. One of the few benefits that the pandemic has brought upon, which is the reaction of solidarity, the solidarity wave that has taken place, especially in the first months, with the families, with our neighbors, with the society, and solidarity in Europe through the Reconstruction Fund that makes us appreciate the value of things public, especially in terms of healthcare, in times of crisis. And I know that Ruben Simank would talk about it. But we cannot be lazy and just stay in our placid life, think that the world is just what we can see in these four walls. Children, as Miguel was saying, and as you can see in the border in Belarus and Poland, refugees and the displaced people, the deprived people in general, did not have a home where to spend the lockdown, or no internet connection so that they can talk and interact with their family members, or to get information or to work. They have just us, the international solidarity. We use the excuse that we need to look upon ourselves in that clumsy and yokel nationalism only within our borders. We will forget that a human being is a human being wherever it is. And we will be condemning thousands of people to a life of death and oblivion. This is my analysis of the European situation and its hopes. You will have your own analysis and your hopes, probably better than mine, but this is the process of the European construction and life itself. It is a relay race, and some of us who have covered already a big part of the whole or the total distance are giving you the relay so that you can run better than we have. That's why I am profoundly thankful to the Yuste Academy, the Yuste Foundation, and I express this gratitude to you, the people from the doctoral seminar, the professors Teresa Freixas, Enrique Moradillos, Eric Bussier, Jesus Baigorri, who will be listening to us from Salamanca, Susana de Río, Rosa María Martínez de Codes, María Esther del Campo, the coordinator, Miguel Ángel Martín Ramos, and the rest of the workers of the Yuste Foundation that have made this seminar possible after months of preparation. Dear students of this doctoral seminar, the fact that you are here today shows that you are excellent students and researchers, and probably also good persons. You have not been selected randomly. The members of the jury are fully aware of the high quality of your papers, so I congratulate you for being among the top 10. You've come here at this point in your lives after many years of effort that probably started when you were children. I am sure that after or behind many of you, there's a history of study, effort, discipline, and some things that you have to renounce to. The many years of work in solo and family support. That's why you're here. But we were, because in spite of all that, you have reached nothing. Because the judgment or the final analysis are done at the end of a project, a long trajectory, or at the end of your lives, not at such a young age. You are running a long race, and you are at the vantage position in this intermediate finish line, but the important one is the final finish line. So don't desperate and keep your discipline and illusions high, because one will need the other. Dear professors, dear teachers and colleagues, you have a big responsibility before you. You are great in what you do and your specialties. You are prestigious and admired people with an excellent professional career. And you have an important challenge today. You have to relay the teachings that you got from your masters and that you have nurtured in your lives to your students. The intellectual house that you live in is not your property. You're users of that intellectual house, and you inherited it from many generations that came before you. You have certainly improved the house. You have made it more comfortable. But you will have to abandon it one day, and leave it to the new generations, such as the one incarnated by the students we have here. You will start opening the door today and showing them around, and tomorrow they will be using it they will be renovating it and making it better. That is definitely the life of a professor, a researcher, or a master. The satisfaction of the students, the renewal of their commitment, not just with Europe, but with the whole of the humankind, the recognition of a serious and responsible work, the admiration towards those who reach their goals, the fact of being able to say about them the word Yuste alumni, that will be the reward. Dedicating a whole life to this challenge is a hard work that will have its reward, even if it's only the personal satisfaction for a good work. My conclusions: Yuste sets up the setting and the atmosphere that you need to reach these goals. So from now and for a few days, we have an important work to carry out. And in this little intellectual oasis that we are living, we have to use the wisdom and the important piece of advice that Saint-Exupéry put in the words of The Little Prince. He said, "Well, I must endure the presence of a few caterpillars if I wish to become acquainted with the butterflies. It seems that they are very beautiful. As for the large animals, I am not at all afraid of any of them. I have my claws." End of quote. Yes, well, we must endure some caterpillars lurking from unknown corners. Some of them are already within us or among us. But this is the only way so that we can get acquainted, we can become acquainted with the butterflies. And we must not be afraid of the large animals, because both Europe and its citizens have claws. And here in Yuste and in many other places in the European Union, we can show you how to use your claws. Thank you.